Hello, everyone. This is Cole from the American Journal of Healthcare Strategy, joined by a very special guest from a unique organization, Matthew. Matthew, please introduce yourself and your current role.
Sure. And thanks for having me, Cole. I'm Matthew Laskowski, CEO and co-founder of Toby. We are a diagnostic startup named after Sherlock Holmes's Bloodhound. My background is in data science. I have a master's of science in computer science where I focused on AI and ML, moved to London, worked in the fintech scene for a little bit, also SaaS companies backed by SoftBank in the startup scene, and now I'm in healthcare.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's a great name of a company as well. And you have really impressive kind of education and a history of work here. One thing I want to ask real quick: the Master's of Science in Computer Science you said was in AI and ML. When you finished that in 2018, was that ahead of its time still? Did you feel like, and also, how hard is it to keep up with everything that's coming out?
Well, I will say that I think I am completely behind everything right now. What was really interesting in that time is the first elective you took at that time was actually the state of the art. And there was only one class. There was no secondary elective that went after that. So I was at the state of the art, but this industry moves so fast. It is hard right now to keep up with all of it.
Absolutely. And that's one of the key points as well is with that background at the time, you probably could have gone and gotten a position at a company like OpenAI or NVIDIA and made, all this money in terms of, your stock holding and all this, but instead you went into kind of a very different area, uh, which is healthcare. And healthcare sometimes struggles with AI adoption. We're not always the fastest to it. So what motivated you and what gave you this idea to found this company?
Yeah, so I've actually been following the space for about a decade, maybe a little bit longer. It's a space where people have used animals very successfully to smell various diseases. It's not only dogs, as people kind of know about, but there's also wasps and bees. Actually, DARPA did some really interesting work post 9/11, where they legitimately had bees in what kind of looked like a handheld canister to look for explosive devices, and they trained them to stick their tongue out like they were, looking in a flower for the nectar. And when enough bees stuck their tongue out, an explosive was there. There's also work with giant African pouch rats. And my interest was reignited a few years ago when they started getting ants to smell cancer. And what we've learned is what we can do is we can replace an animal's nose with a instrument that's much more sensitive and an animal's brain with machine learning or artificial intelligence. And I went through a personal health story where it took 5, 6 years to find a diagnosis. And during that time, I very much got reabsorbed in the literature. And no one had actually launched a product in this space with this underlying technology. I personally think it's the most under leveraged technology in healthcare. And after calling and emailing and LinkedIning people asking why no one had put a product in this space out yet, I realized there was really no good reason. It was mainly an execution gap.
Wow, so. What is execution gap? What does that mean? They just haven't taken the knowledge and actually executed on it.
Yeah, there's really a few main pitfalls that these companies have made. Two of them I'm gonna keep secret and proprietary because we don't want too many people following our path. But basically, just the right team wasn't assembled yet. It was very academic. It was very heavily academic, and I think they just had the wrong business model and strategy in place. So it was really just putting a number of pieces that were already out there together in the right way. And I think we've now found our path forward.
That is really cool. Yeah, nice. And of course, you would think initially, right, that you need a large academic team, but sometimes, right, the academic teams don't always translate into actual products right away. And so that's kind of where your team is unique because you have people who are experienced in these exact laboratory tests, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So my co-founder, Dragan Sibachanovic, he has been part of three successful diagnostic exits. He was the second scientist, actually second employee and first scientist at Guardant Health, now one of the leading companies in blood biopsies. And before starting the company, we actually not only researched, but we interviewed about 8 to 10 founders in the space And it's not that no one has done this before, it's that no one's been successful. And one of the big pitfalls again is people get bill money from a grant, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They have really good results for about a year, and then that grant money runs out. They've never even tried to transition to a revenue generating business model, and they go back to academia. So really, it's about assembling the right team, including our other co-founder who's been part of startups for decades and had many successful exits. And it's just about creating the technology that's right for commercialization, which might have a few small technical drawbacks, but overall, in order to bring the technology to the masses, it's the right call.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And so you're in this space where companies have failed. One of the reasons, like you said, it's about that team. The science is there, the product or the underlying idea works really well, but the actual implementation of those products in the commercial space had not really been successful before you guys. That kind of asks the question: where do you think this is going to go? What is that goal for you? Do you want this to be in every single institution? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the goal, and there's I think a few different axes here we can talk about. Right now, we have a two cancer test. Again, this is analytically validated. It's at the prototype stage. We're not in market yet, but we have a two cancer test for prostate and kidney cancer. And in the next few weeks, we will have completed that urologic trifecta and added bladder cancer. We want to create a, say, 10 or a multi-cancer test along with a few other neurological diseases where there's a lot of research indicating that this works. Someone just has to bring it to market. And I do want to add that our 10 cancer test is going to cost us, we might charge people differently, but it's going to cost us the same as our one cancer test. So we want to be able to screen for a whole bunch of tests. And screening is not the same as diagnostics and it's not the same as prognostics. And we just want to act as the central data science platform. So there's all these hospitals in the world with the technology that we need, the instrument. It's very standard mass spec. Like when you get a drug test for cocaine, it's that exact same instrument. We just want to act as the centralized data science platform whereby hospitals can run the tests, send the data to us centrally, we analyze it and send back results.
So, can you explain real quick why is it costing the same for 13 or I think you said was it 13 or 11 as it is for one? Why is it scalable that way?
Because our innovations on the data science side. So um, basically what we do is we run mass spectrometry, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, and we generate a whole bunch of data. We generate 3.5 million data sets. And normally today, what you do is you take all that data, and in that there's hundreds and hundreds of biomarkers, and you throw everything away except the biomarker for what you're using. Usually today it's for toxicology. So again, I'm going to use the cocaine example. And all this other data is just not used. So what we do is we take all that data and we have different, let's call them flavors of algorithms or different pattern recognition algorithms. So we've already created ours for prostate cancer. We've also created it for kidney cancer. And we promised our pre-seed investors we could develop a screening test for bladder cancer, which is very, very aggressive, for under $100,000 in under 90 days. And we're very much coming under both of those targets. So we just run our separate algorithms for the cancers to see if our test pops for that other cancer. We also know that our prostate and kidney cancer tests are highly differentiated, and we can basically parse those apart. The prostate and kidney are probably functionally and physically the two closest organs. So arguably, and this is what we're trying to prove, our hypothesis is that kidney and say lung cancer are even more separated. So maybe it's not no cost, maybe it's an extra tenth of a cent for the electricity to run those other algorithms, but
Right.
it's fairly trivial.
That's what I was wondering is what the compute cost would be on the extra algorithms, but it's not as expensive as let's say some of the new algorithms coming out. We just read about O1, right? And we're limited to 30 messages per week unless we start paying that 2 grand a month. So it's not as complex because it's just a smaller amount of data that it's looking for, right?
Yeah, like in genetics, you will deal with terabytes of data per person.
Right.
We're dealing with multiple orders of magnitude lower than that. You can run the inference, basically the predictions on your laptop. You could probably even run it on a Raspberry Pi pretty easily. Now, I think there was a hypothesis 1 to 2 decades ago that your genome was significantly affected with diseases such as cancer. I think we now have 1 to 2 decades of data proving that the signal of cancers in genetics is actually quite weak, and it's very expensive to get at least our initial findings are showing that the signal is very easy to find and it's very strong. And we don't need to generate a ton of data to just be able to predict if someone does or doesn't have cancer.
Okay, so that's interesting. So instead of looking at sequencing some, or going through terabytes of data, you're only going through this little tiny bit, and that's through mass spectrometry, is what you said. Of course, as the audience knows and probably can tell, I am not an expert on laboratory tests, which kind of brings us to the next question: is can you share some recent achievements? We read about in doing the research for this episode, I read about the Association of Diagnostic and Laboratory Medicine competition, which kind of signaled to me that you guys were legit, right? So can you tell us
Yeah.
about some of the events that you've done, and also why you're getting recognition? There's thousands of products every year that are coming out, right? So what are you guys doing that's special, that's getting you this recognition?
Yeah. So first, I'll go through the kind of two recent awards we've won. There was actually one a few days ago as well, and then also why we're unique. So first, we won the 42+1 competition. So ADLM, the Association of Diagnostic and Laboratory Medicine, is the largest event in our industry. There's about 20,000 people at the event. They rented out the entire McCormick Center in Chicago, and we won first place out of about 100 companies, and it comes with about $1 million of financing. It's dilutive financing, it's not prize money, and some of the best judges in all of diagnostics were there. Separately, actually, just late last week, we won the Cambridge Innovation Center public health grant in order to develop our software because they see the societal good. And I think the reason we're winning these is because we have a few main advantages over the competition. First, we are an easy urine test and not a more invasive blood test. I know the new term, or I guess it's not so new, but as a blood biopsy, a lot of people still have issues with blood and needles. Second, it's affordable. Um, it's going to be a sub $50 cost, at least to us. I don't know, again, what we're going to charge, but the real only difference we have versus a drug test, just so you can think about price parity, is they will run the instrument for 15 minutes. We run ours for 40 minutes, and we can probably bring that 40-minute mark down. So as far as the costs involved, it should be price parity with a standard drug test like you do before a new job. It's also got world-class accuracy, at least our initial results. We're getting kind of near perfect differentiation between cancerous samples and healthy samples. Again, this can always fall apart in future studies, but at least our initial studies, we're getting extremely powerful results, area under the curves of plus 0.95. It's also, as I said, a platform technology, just to your previous question around price. Our COGS, or our price per indication, do not increase. To be fair, we might lose some accuracy with some kind of confounding diseases, but our internal price will not increase. And patent pending, we actually do have the first broad patent in the space that covers the family of analytical chemistry.
So that's very different, right? Especially what you said about it being that close in cost to do these tests as it would be to a standard drug test. One of the issues that we had found with other organizations doing different types of tests, but very similar in terms of the overall idea, is that the costs end up getting staggering, right? So now, you're not just having to charge somebody for the R&D so that everybody can make their money back, but you're then going to have to charge $300-400 on top of that for this kit or this device or whatever it is. But what you're saying is not only do you not have to charge for any of these devices because institutions are already utilizing this technology for the most part, the base level technology, from what I understand, but your costs on your end is just as low as widely accepted insurance tests like a drug test.
Yeah, absolutely. So the incremental R&D for our bladder cancer study is coming in at $86,000, I think $413, somewhere in that range, which really is also going to allow us to attack the long tail of diseases that normally are cost prohibitive. But on top of that, if you think about the past decade of investment into diagnostics, everything's gone into sequencing. They can make money in two ways. They can make money in patient selection for big pharma, where they push people to the right buckets, or selling data to big pharma. So you even look at these huge sequencing companies, and they've done 30,000 tests a year after being in business for 8, 9 years. And they actually cannot be in the diagnostics business. They don't want to be. So really, it's not a viable solution for these sequencing companies to be in screening. Whereas for us, we have an extremely low cost platform. We generate a ton of data cheaply. It may not be as precise, but with data science and just with a volume of data, a lot of that cancels out. And so, we have a very unique um, commercial proposition here.
Well, so I'm interested. How did you get your costs for R&D so low? How long did the R&D take, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah. So specifically with bladder cancer, again, we said we could finish it in 100 days in under 90 days and under $100,000. We're coming in at about $86,000 for this validation. And I want to say we're not done yet, but maybe 79 to 84 days. We're cutting it a little bit close. And just from an R&D perspective, there's almost no line items to think of. Normally in diagnostics, you have to generate a new piece of hardware, and that takes years and tens of millions of dollars. For us, the hardware and the wet lab side have already been figured out. We've just pieced them together in interesting ways. We need money to purchase urine, and that's on the order of, in some cases, tens of dollars, in some cases, hundreds. Probably the highest would be $1,500 a sample, about $50 to analyze the sample on an instrument. Again, we're using retail pricing there. And then the data science, which is maybe a few $1,000s and maybe $1,000 for shipping. So you're really not talking from an R&D perspective about anything that's expensive, and those costs are coming down as we do, work with kind of more volume discounted pricing for purchasing our biosamples. The R&D is quite negligible to our overall business model.
That's really impressive because a lot of these startups, but even established R&D is the largest thing that you're going to see on their their
Yeah,
balance sheets, right? So that's impressive, and it kind of goes into the next question. A lot of institutions I've spoken with are wary of working with startups for many reasons. One of the reasons is because they don't want to adopt this platform and then you go away, right? You become part of a larger conglomerate, and then all of a
yeah.
sudden they're beholden to this larger conglomerate. Is your intention to kind of grow the company and to expand and expand, or is it to be kind of acquired? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. Ultimately, we want to bring this to as many people as possible. And I maybe am arrogant, but I don't think I'm so arrogant that I think I can bring this to the entire world. And it's at a certain point, I mean, the goal for most startups is to get acquired. I
Mhm.
perfectly accept that. But we do want to get it to a place where it has legs of its own and people can keep using it. I think the beauty here is a lot of hospitals have the instrument. And even if you wanted to buy the instrument, people hear mass spec. And what they think of is the $800,000 million piece of equipment that someone uses for their PhD to just do extremely precise work. We are using what's known as a nominal mass instrument or a single quadrupole, nominal being the operative word. It's the cheap one. It's $160,000 with all the bells and whistles. It's not extremely sensitive. And because we are just acting as a software platform, we don't really have our hooks into these organizations like other companies. We just have to do the data processing. So, whether we run ourselves or we get acquired, that data science portion should always be very easily available for us to do, or even for them to bring in house if eventually it does come to
I appreciate the honest answer, right? Because you could have just said, "No, we'll never." But what you
that.
said is honest, right? Your purpose and your mission are going to, of course, continue on and come first. It'll be available to everyone, but also that's an important part, right? You're not going to have this proprietary, like Epic computer, right? Like
Yeah,
all of your systems are on this Epic software computer or something like that, where
yeah,
if you leave it, you have to throw them in the trash. I mean, it's not that way at all. So I think that's a really important point to a lot of these institutions. And that kind of goes into one of the other questions here, which is, um, talking about kind of this market potential, this market demand. Why is there a demand for this in the
yeah.
current institutions? Why do people want to invest? Why do hospitals want to be a part of this? What's the reason? If you can just fill us, maybe like the environment, fill us in on the
Yeah,
current business environment, if that makes sense.
yeah, that makes perfect sense. So we are targeting a few different market segments, hospitals and insurance. I think pharma right now is more opportunistic in terms of a companion diagnostic. But hospitals, if you think about it, specialty care and especially cancer specialty care is one of the last remaining revenue and profit engines of hospitals. And with our test, you know, today it's quite difficult to make a business case to hospitals just on savings, right? And with us, we can remove a ton of biopsies and necessary specialty care for prostate cancer. But really, by doing a yearly screening test and finding people with bladder cancer for the first time, with kidney cancer early, with prostate cancer, and hopefully eventually more diseases, we can really funnel them into those cancer centers in order to generate revenue. And the flip side of that coin, on the insurance side, um, when you find cancer early, and it's always much cheaper to do preventative care than acute care, and so I think that business case is pretty clear. But for the hospitals, there's a huge revenue upside for them here in order to drive that specialty care. I think a bladder cancer patient will spend $90,000 of incremental healthcare spend in their first year, and then between $1.5 to $2,000 a month thereafter. So even if the test is a complete wash, or even maybe at a slight loss, and potentially even for free, there's a very strong business case to be made here.
That makes a lot of sense. And because of your low cost, it's even more reinforced, right? Because you're not, like you said, we're not risking this huge sum of money for negative tests, or for a positive test that only makes, $10,000. I mean, these are hundreds of $1,000s in losses as well as lost lives, right? I mean, there is a potential for life saving here as well, right?
Yeah, and that's definitely our our primary goal. When you screen early, you detect early, and you have improved outcomes across the board. And if there are any CFOs listening to this, there's just a ton of knock-on downstream effects, right? When you find these things early, cost savings, live savings, and so on and so forth. We do have some quite unique data, and this is where I think our test could be quite revolutionary. We are finding that we can detect early stage cancer. Now, that's not the same as detecting cancer early. For that, you need a longitudinal or a prospective study. That's a different type of study. But we're finding we can diagnose or screen for early stage cancer just as well as late stage. We do have a separate issue where we're actually not great at differentiating between early and late stage. But the competitors cannot screen for early stage cancer. So, we're going to take that win with the loss as well. So we are a screening technology. We're not a diagnostic technology where the stage, and we're not a prognostic technology.
And so, why is that important to distinguish those things for potential hospitals who are looking to get involved with your organization?
Yeah. Um, it's where we sit in the workflow. So there's a lot of very strong and good incumbent tests for diagnostics, and they're accurate, but they're also extremely expensive. Let's take lung cancer screening as a very clear example. You need a low dose CT scan to screen for lung cancer. The highest estimates put it at 4% adoption every other year. Lower estimates I'd say your more fair estimates might even be lower than that. But it's not like you're going to be able to test every American or every smoker in the US in a low dose CT scan a year. I think that's pretty unreasonable just from a cost, friction standpoint. But you can, you already do collect urine every year when someone comes in for their yearly health check. So you collect 50 mils of urine. We just need to siphon off between 3 and 5 of those mils, and we can screen for a number of diseases. We're by no means going to be perfect, but we believe that our current accuracy makes a very compelling case where we can then take the highest risk individuals we find and put them on better treatment paths.
What does the actual workflow in the clinic look like? If we can just kind of walk us through start to finish,
Yeah.
especially for our physician leaders listening, they love probably the idea of the technology, but some of them might really worry, is this going to add this huge complex computer workflow for my staff?
Yeah. No, it's a very, very good question. So let me just first differentiate how we change the standard of care. So we take something like bladder, kidney cancer today. It's really only found mid to late stage. The porcelain of your toilet is quite white, and what will happen is a patient will have blood in their urine, and it will be very strong red contrast. And then you will go into the doctor, and then you will get a diagnostic test that says yes, you do in fact have bladder cancer, and it's advanced.
Yep.
With our test, what would happen is you would go in for your yearly health visit. You're hopefully already collecting, your yearly health visit. You're already collecting hopefully urine. That urine is already sent to the lab. It's put on a number of different instruments or workflows or processes. And we just need to siphon 3 of those mils off, maybe 5 at the high end, to the instrument that hopefully these organizations already have, or they would purchase a new one for not a $3 million MRI that's used to screen, but a $160,000 instrument. The data would go through their lymph system or their EHR directly to us. The data science is quite simple. It gets sent back, and the patient can know within 48 hours or some very compressed time frame if they are flagged or not flagged for cancer. At that point, then they would go to the existing diagnostic and prognostic workflows. So we sit on top of all the existing diagnostic workflows in order to find people early. But then once we flag them for a specific cancer, they go to those more accurate but also more expensive tests that they would never do yearly. It's just too cost prohibitive.
So it's like in a way like these at home tests for some cancers. They do the test. It says you might possibly have cancer. You're high risk, right? Based on the results, you need to go in for the full examination and get kind of a full rundown to diagnose exactly what's going on.
Yes, absolutely. And you can definitely use those to drive patient volumes at hospitals. One unique thing about our technology, and probably a lot of leaders listening to this are thinking of genetics, where basically the material you're looking for is extremely fragile. VOCs in urine are incredibly stable.
Mhm.
There's really no issues around shipping, et cetera. No, we actually don't have any short or medium term plans to go direct to consumer. It's capital intensive, and direct to consumer has not performed very well in the past decade, or maybe 5 to 7 years. So we don't have that right now. Our goal is really to get the technology into the clinic so they can use it through their basically their system, or maybe do some mailers around their area in order to generate patient volume and revenue and help a lot of people in the process.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well because it makes you, I think, for some people, a more solid physician partner, right? Because you're not putting all of your eggs in the marketing towards consumer basket, right? I mean, you're working with hospitals and physicians and institutions, and I love that workflow. Last question, because I know really nothing about these machines. The $160,000 machine, is it used for many other things as well, or is it because the value proposition for hospitals to buy one of these machines from wherever they get it?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So normally these machines sit idle most of the time, and how a lot of CFOs will rightfully so complain about the utility and utilization rates of their instruments, especially for drug testing machines, right? So what happens for a drug testing machine is you never want to tell your employees when you're doing a mass drug test, but you need to be able to work through that peak demand. And so everyone will get surprised, right? It might happen over a few weeks or however long, but then for the next few months, the machine will sit idle. So as long as you can use that unused capacity, you could use it for our test. I think what's probably going to happen with our first few partnerships and sales, and anyone listening here wants to reach out to us in order to be those individuals, we will probably use their initial instruments, although we do have a preferred instrument that we think is optimized for our workflow. But at a certain point, our instrument will basically have quote unquote preloaded algorithms where we have a 3 or a 5 cancer test that's been clinically validated, in which case I think anyone should want to use our instrument and not their existing one because of just the time to market and time to value. But we can always keep that as an open point of conversation.
Okay, so there is a physical instrument that you will have your software on it as an option.
It won't have our software on it. All we need is the data from those instruments sent to
Oh,
our algorithm. And so we can work across many instruments. If we think
oh,
about like the long term pie in the sky 20 years from now, what our goal is we just want to be that central platform. And even outside of the US and in countries where they can afford new instruments but they do have these mass spec devices and they all do, they're just sending us the data, and we might have to calibrate it to the specific manufacturer or the specific model. But there is a lot of crossover and basically pre-trained models that can be had between those different instruments.
okay, and it's just that you have a preferred instrument where, for many reasons, probably I'm assuming, was kind of the best option for this kind of thing. And it's only 160 grand from what I'm grasping.
Correct. The full setup is less than $200,000. We think it's the most optimized if someone wants to do this at volume, but there are plenty of other technologies that are very good, just not what I would say is the most optimized process you can run. But there's no reason someone could not use their existing instrument. It just might require a bit more manual work, or really the manual work they're already doing.
Yeah. And that's great though, because like you said, so many already have it, and it can really. I think one of the things too people think of is, well, the only drug tests, the only mass spectrometers are in urban areas. Let's say they're not in the rural. But when you kind of reduce that workflow of these tests in the city, it also can expand to the areas throughout the U.S. Right? I mean, how much of a savings or a reduction in work are we expecting from this? Just so I can get a number around the savings.
Yeah, it's really going to vary. So I don't even think we should think about it in terms of savings. I think it should be thought about in terms of access, right? So say you want a mammogram, there are some areas in the US where it's really prohibitive. Like you would have to drive 300 miles to find the nearest unit. There's also not enough mammogrammers, and so the salaries they're asking for are rightfully very high. Um, but these mobile vans are really the only option, and those are a great option, but you're not going to be able to test in most urban areas at volume across the entire US. Really, the only option you have is to find a local health hub and send out mailers. So, I think a lot of savings can be had, but the bigger opportunity here is giving people access to healthcare who before never would have had it and never would have gone in for their normal the normal screenings they should have.
Yeah, no, I agree. So this actually could impact population health. This could impact public health on a wider scale. So really, really cool technology. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing this, Matthew. I'm excited to see what happens. And I'm also just impressed because I've spoken with so many startup founders. The funding that you guys have had has been much lower compared to so many of the other organizations, and the product is so well done, right? So I'm really impressed, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.